My name's Darcy. I teach this this weekly lecture, if you might be new, called Practical English, and we've been through Lewin, based in Nantong, broadcasting weekly lectures on a variety of themes since February, maybe March, since March, I think. So this is the 9th lesson this year. This is lesson number 9. 9 weeks of doing these online lectures. What a journey it's been. And we've covered topics ranging from biology, modern science, geography, history. So this is a branch of history called biography. Biography looks at the history of a person's life. Last week we were doing public speaking. Sorry, last week the topic was public speaking and how to craft a speech and how to craft a good speech. What is the purpose of giving talks, or how can you give a good talk when you're called to, when you know your purpose, I suppose. And so we looked at how to construct a talk, how to structure a talk based on based on formulating an idea, having a message, and talking about. We really talked about how influential, how powerful ideas are, and people are remembered for their ideas. Great people in history are remembered for their ideas. They influence us in the modern day. Welcome. It's good. We have a good group here. Last week was pretty quiet. Now we have 7. So, famous people in history is this week's theme. Great speeches in history was last week's theme. And incidentally, because there's only so much time, we're limiting the topic to Eastern philosophers, those thinkers, those great people in history that influence Asian culture: Chinese, Japanese, Korean, Vietnamese, Thai. And in future lessons, we'll be looking at Western philosophers, starting with the Greeks. So I hope that some of you who are here tonight have been following the series of lectures. And I'm going to give you the link to the group where you can get more information. I provide links. I provide worksheets, information. I'm available for answering questions, taking your feedback, your suggestions, your ideas. I want to be able to teach something that's applicable and relevant to you. These lessons are aimed at students, middle school, high school, college level students, and above, I suppose, who are interested in, the outside world, international culture. I can give you guys some introductions into that. I have some expertise in these areas. So I'm giving you this QR code to join the study group, because if you are new and you haven't been following past lessons, all of these lessons build on the previous ones. So we looked at geography, we looked at European history, and then we looked at the power of ideas, and now we're talking about people in history, great people in history, and we're starting with Eastern philosophers, and in future lessons we'll be looking at Western philosophers, ancient Western philosophers. So I guess we've got everybody here. I've already dropped the worksheet into the Leyland group, and I've already dropped the worksheet earlier into the study group. It looks like this. Let me see if anybody's in there. So, this, yes. Okay, we're good. So, this is the worksheet that you get when you join the study group. And each week, you get one of these worksheets that has 24 of the keywords. So, through the course of this lecture, we stay on the topic or on the theme, and these are kind of the most meaningful keywords. So this is what the worksheet looks like. And the Eastern philosophers, you can see the pictures below. We have Confucianism, Taoism, and Buddhism. And we'll come back to these keywords in just a moment. So Eastern philosophy, I guess the most important word is philosophy. Okay. So what is philosophy? What is Eastern philosophy? Well, Eastern philosophy is the prevailing systems of belief originated in Asia, China, Japan, Korea, and India and Nepal. So, going way back into the ancient world, before the modern borders were drawn, you just had tribes of people, ethnic groups settled in various regions of Asia. So, if you're in Western China or Northern China, you'll see a higher proportion of people of, that local regional ethnicity, Indian, Pakistani, Central Asian, Mongolian. So looking at the map, we see China, and west of China, the second largest country is India. And where India meets China, you have Nepal, which is, I think, technically its own country still. But it borders, right on China. And it's situated in the Himalayan mountains. So there's Central Asia, India, Pakistan, and then you have China and Japan and Korea, and the South Asian countries, Thailand, Vietnam, and Cambodia. Okay. So it's within this region, this continental region, that in the West we sort of look at this region, the people that come from this region, as heavily influenced by, Eastern thought. I'm not sure how it's viewed here. But there is there's a difference between the Western worldview and the Eastern worldview. They have different histories. And so when you can look at them both, when you can learn about both, you can really have an appreciation for their strengths and how they complement each other. Why do I want to talk about this? Well, I'm here living in China, and I've always been interested in the Eastern thinking, Eastern Chinese art and Indian art, Indian philosophy. Japanese, Korean culture. So actually, my time in China, I visited a number of temples. I visited a number of these national parks, and climbed mountains and had opportunities to meet with real practicing Taoist monks, I think, in Taoist temples, particularly in Sichuan. Um, uh, and it's quite an experience. So it's a very personal topic for me. Um, and I also have a lot of knowledge, a lot of interest in the Western philosophy as well. So I want to talk about that in a future lesson. If you are a student at our school and you're taking our courses, we do cover the biographies of quite a few famous people, scientists, political leaders, or those ancient rulers, kings, and warlords, artists. Okay, so in this series of lessons, great people in history, we're starting out with this first lesson here on the Eastern philosophers. In the second lesson, we'll look at Western ancient philosophers, the Greek and Roman philosophers, and then we'll probably move into the scientists and the artists after that. Those that you learn about in our courses at our school. So everybody should be familiar with what is Taoism, Confucianism, and Buddhism. Maybe some of you are, or your family, practice one of these kinds of religions. Certainly everybody is familiar with Confucianism. Confucianism is very, very influential in modern day China. So our goal today is to look at the lives of these three philosophers, Confucius, Lao Tzu, and the Buddha, or Siddhartha Gautama. And along the way, you'll learn the vocabulary, the key words, the meanings of these philosophical terms, such as ethics and religion and spirituality. See, the difference between Western and Eastern philosophy, I'm no expert in this, but the difference between Western and Eastern philosophy, I think, is that, the most obvious difference is that Western cultures use the Latin alphabet, the Latin. We use the Roman alphabet, let's say, and so we are limited by our system of language, and that the meanings of these kinds of words influence how we think and how we communicate. And in the East, it's completely different. It's the character system of language, and more. I've been a student of Chinese, and more can be expressed very vaguely, very generally in the character system, in the Chinese character system, for example, Japanese character system. So, whereas Western, in Western thought, we like to be very specific, and we like to use language to really concretely, precisely define what we're trying to say. In Eastern thought, there's more to it than that. Anyway, so let's look at the terms that we have here. Okay. Oops. So hopefully you know some of these words already. Belief. Belief is the first word. And what is belief? I mean, it's a feeling, it's a conviction. The opposite of belief is doubt, where we question. So, we have a firm sense of certainty about the day-to-day realities, like the sun coming up in the morning and setting in the evening. We just know this is the reality. This is what we can expect, and we believe that it will always be that way, I suppose. We just have a strong conviction, a strong certainty that the sun will always rise in the morning. It's noisy out there. Okay. And then the things that we can't easily verify through our own experience, we have to go with what we feel. So different cultures around the world, different people of different backgrounds live their lives through their own personal worldview or set of beliefs, and it's amazing how many different kinds of beliefs there are in the society today, and we can look at what kinds of people, events, ideas influence these beliefs. Again, we want to try to educate ourselves to arrive at an accurate understanding of reality. We want to try to be open to changing our beliefs to come to the correct one, the correct belief about who we are in the world, in the universe, and how we should conduct our lives. What sorts of goals should we be striving after? Like, we could say that the monetary system, the market economy, is just a belief system. And those who firmly believe in it, it's that it is the right system, will work very hard to succeed in it. Other people don't believe that's the most important thing. Monetary, material success isn't actually, the defining feature of isn't the defining reason why we're put here, on this world. We don't know what happens to us after we pass on. Maybe that's all there is to it. We're just, we're just animals, I guess. And when we pass on, what we call consciousness, or our awareness, our personality, dies with the body. Or maybe there's something within us that, after the body dies, moves into another plane, another reality. So we're talking about what is belief. It influences how we conduct our lives, how we act. Biography is the history of a person's life. Compassion, again, like all philosophies, all the great philosophical thinkers, Eastern and Western, taught the importance of acting compassionately. Passion is a feeling of strong emotion. It can be strong happiness. It can also be strong anger. So compassion is feeling for other people. Like the opposite of compassion is selfishness. So yeah, like selfishness is bad because it can cause harm. It can cause harm to ourselves, and certainly can cause harm to everybody else. If we live in a society where people act selfishly, it's not a comfortable society, not a comfortable environment to live in. The public places are looted of all of all useful resources. So we need to act compassionately. The golden rule in pretty much all of the major religions teach that we should try to feel for others and act towards others in the way that we would like to be treated. That's basically what compassion is. When you see somebody who is in pain for some reason, you do something, suffering. When you see somebody who is suffering, you act compassionately to try to ease the suffering for them, to lift them up. The next one is conduct, behavior, essentially. Correct behavior. So there's behavior, just how we act, and then there's conduct, how we always should strive to act. So, police and civil servants, those who serve the public, serve as examples of good conduct. They have to adhere to a strict code of conduct. And anybody who is interested in improving their life spiritually, ethically, it starts with how you formulate your ideas and your beliefs, and then how you act on those ideas. Ego. Consciousness. Consciousness is awareness. So when we're asleep, we're unconscious. We don't really have any memory of what it's like to be asleep. And we often forget things when we're awake too. So we have to exert some kind of effort. We have to work hard on how we focus our attention, our awareness, what we place our attention on. And maybe it's difficult in the modern day with mobile phones and televisions and computers and the media always distracting us. Living in densely populated cities, urban environments full of distraction. So consciousness is a word used to describe our waking, aware, focused, concentrated state of mind. Compare what it feels like to be really focused on something like reading a book, to watching a film, to doing many things like driving and talking to your friend and noticing, everything around you. There's different kinds of states of consciousness. And ego, well, if compassion is feelings for other people, and selfishness is not having a feeling for other people. Ego is that sense of self. Like the Eastern philosophers, particularly, not so much the Western philosophers, the Eastern philosophers really taught that ego, or our sense of self, is what is the source of suffering. Suffering is pain. So when we see ourselves as an individual, striving for, getting a better, getting better means, more wealth, power, success, and so on. These are selfish, ego-driven desires, and the more you strive after these things, like when you succeed at something, you should feel good, but quite often you kind of feel empty. It's the striving after things that feels good, I guess, chasing after things. But once you have things, like when you have everything that you could ever want, you still feel this kind of emptiness. So the Eastern philosophers taught that, it doesn't matter how many things you succeed at getting. It's acting from satisfying your egotistical, individualistic desires that is the cause of suffering. Enlightenment, I couldn't really define it, but it's kind of a blissful state of being where maybe you lose attachment to the ego. Ethics, again, conduct, ethics. Conduct, how, behaving according to how we're supposed to behave, with respect and compassion. And ethics is, again, like knowing which is the right decision to make in situations where it's not exactly clear what the right behavior is. Faith and belief are closely tied together. Like there are certain things in the universe that we just don't see with our eyes, but they do exist. Science teaches us that there is a range of frequencies, and we are constrained to a limited range of frequencies, but frequencies are energy, vibrations, energy fields. Energy frequencies exist far outside of the spectrum of what we can see with our eyes. So, belief and faith is, we know that these energies exist, we just can't see them. Forbearance is a kind of compassion or tolerance. Ignorance. Ignorance is, the opposite of ignorance is wisdom. So ignorance is you just don't know. You haven't learned yet. Intention is like consciousness. Intention is how we focus our attention, intention and attention. So how we use our will, how we use our decision-making capacities to reach a desired goal. And again, the Eastern philosophers really question what kind of goals we should strive after, what kind of path, to use the metaphor, what kind of path we should be walking on to live a life that is meaningful. Materialism is the material physical world. So, in the modern day, like when scientific instruments and scientific, when some of the great sort of enlightened scientists of the 18th, 19th century started producing their theories, they were able to sort of disprove the religious systems of faith that people used to look to as what should define reality. And so this is, in philosophical discourse, you could say that atheism and materialism are the beliefs that there are no intelligent forces in the universe, and we're not that intelligent either. We are just chemical reactions in a living organism. So that's what materialism is supposed to be about. And again, we can easily fall into materialistic habits of thinking and acting, and this again leads to dissatisfaction, pain, and suffering. The Eastern philosophers of the Eastern thinkers going back thousands of years understood this, and it still rings true today. Meditation. So again, the difference between Western and Eastern philosophy is clearly shown here. Eastern philosophy, all of these Eastern philosophies are rooted in the practice of meditation. Western religions use what they call prayer, but that's very different. It is kind of different than what meditation is. Meditation is a practice of sitting quietly and working on controlling attention, intention, focusing attention on what is kind of present in the space, I guess. I'm not really much of a meditator myself, so I couldn't talk about what it's like to meditate. But meditation gives, people who practice meditation an ability to control their attention. I mean, we can find ways of meditating in our daily lives, like when we are exercising, when we are listening to music, when we are reading. It's a kind of state of mind where we can really relax and not have to worry too much, I guess. A myth is a very old story. Noble means very good, basically. Acting selflessly. A wise thinker is a noble thinker. Philosophy, I'm going to get to the definition of philosophy in just a moment, and religion as well. A sage and a scholar, these are just words to describe these these types of people. We have the three main thinkers here: Confucius, Lao Tzu, and the Buddha or Siddhartha Gautama. And you could say that they were sages. You could also say that Confucius and Lao Tzu were also scholars, in that they dedicated their lives to reading books and writing. Not all the sages were scholars. Not all the sages read a great deal or wrote anything down. So that's the difference between a sage and a scholar. A scholar is a learned person, and then a sage is somebody who devotes their life to the pursuit of wisdom. Spirituality, another word for seeking after wisdom and enlightenment. Suffering is pain. Suffering is discomfort. Suffering is those negative emotions. A text, kind of a document, and wisdom. Okay, so this is part of a series of the biographies of influential thinkers. We're looking at Eastern thinkers today, but I'm not teaching an entire course on Eastern philosophy. I don't know enough about it. I'm just going to give you guys introductions to famous influential thinkers and their ideas and their lives. So history is the study of past events, particularly human history, and how events are connected over time. So how one thing leads to the next thing, or how one later event was influenced by an earlier event. Other words that we use to describe history are chronology, how we order events. A biography is the story of a person's life. Philosophy. So here's the formal definition of philosophy. The study of knowledge. How we come to know things and believe things or accept things as true. There's having an idea of what, is a possibility, I suppose. And then there's having knowledge, how an idea fits into the reality, the world that we actually live in. A theory that informs attitude and behavior. So, again, like religious institutions, religious movements come and go. They rise and fall in power and influence. Because religions are led by institutions, churches, movements, groups of people. Philosophy is more individualistic. we have philosophers, and we can kind of pay great honor to these great thinkers who produced, ideas that really influenced and helped other people. But philosophy is sort of an individual pursuit. You don't join a movement. You don't do any kind of ritual or ceremony the way that religion does. So that's the difference between philosophy and religion. Philosophy looks at how we use language to arrive at ideas or ways of describing what we experience in our lives, how we feel, and so on. So thinking and reasoning, wisdom, belief, ideology, values, ethics, morals, perspective, and viewpoint. These are all, key words in the discourse of philosophy. And religion, belief in and worship of a supernatural intelligence, a god or many gods, deities, a system of faith and worship. And I don't want to disparage religion. There's a lot of wisdom contained in religious text, in religious thought, I think. I'm not going to talk too much about that. So let's get into our biographies. Starting with Confucius. So who was Confucius? And why is he so important in modern day China? Why do we see statues of him in virtually every city, particularly the universities? Okay, so try to read along if you can. Confucius was a Chinese philosopher who lived during the time of the Zhou dynasty, 6th century BC. He was born and lived in Shifu, China. The son of a soldier. Unfortunately, his father was killed when he was only 3 years old. So Confucius grew up without a father. He was raised and nurtured by his mother. And according to the history, his mother influenced him to become a lover of learning and the pursuit of wisdom. So he learned many great things from his mother. So we could say Confucius is such a great man. Happy Mother's Day to all the mothers out there. Behind every great man, there's a nurturing, wise mother. Excuse me. Growing up, he enjoyed many hobbies, including archery, calligraphy, reading, poetry, history, and doing arithmetic or mathematics. So what is all of that? Archery, calligraphy, poetry, and arithmetic. These were his hobbies. So after his mother's death, Confucius was greatly grieved. So this was an important event in his life. Two important events in Confucius's life. The death of his father and then the death of his mother. He was greatly grieved, very saddened by this. And he spent many years alone in introspection. He just spent time by himself. During this time, he thought a lot about becoming a sage, somebody who studied literature and history and taught wisdom. So he wanted to become a teacher. During his lifetime, the ruling dynastic family, the Zhou dynasty, the ruling dynastic family was losing its hold on power. It was a dangerous time with feudal warlords fighting for supremacy. Confucius became an advocate for education and political reform. He wanted to invite people to turn away from the common practices of violence and corruption. Reformer. Oops, I see why. No, that's not a problem. Internet problems. and he was using his voice, his ideas to influence, advocate for peace, tolerance, ethical conduct, not selfishness, corruption, violence, or chaos, let's say. He wanted social harmony, which was a kind of a novel concept during that time. Confucius became a sage for the Duke of Lu, and he spent another 14 years in exile, where he continued to develop his ideas. So here's the all-in-one book that you can get. He wrote at least 3 major works. They are the Analects, or the Doctrine of the Mean, and the Great Learning. So, what is Confucianism today? Confucianism, as it is now known today, is how the ideas of Confucius are carried on today. So again, we live in a very different world than the world that Confucius grew up in. So there are Confucian institutions or Confucian groups, Confucian scholars that work to kind of, publish material and, use talks and cultural events, art, and so on, to spread the ideas or keep the ideas of Confucianism, the values that he advocated for, relevant. Many scholars and academic institutions dedicate their profession to the learning and teaching of the Confucian ideas. Confucianism is a moral doctrine. So a doctrine is it's a teaching. Basically, it's a teaching pertaining to what is right and wrong, good and bad. A moral doctrine that emphasizes individual responsibility. So the way to live a happy, successful life is through individual responsibility and righteous conduct, kindness, and service to others, right? That's kind of a dangerous idea, or not a very popular idea, because, we live in a very competitive kind of a society. But Confucius went against the grain and said we should all work, to serve our neighbors. Honesty, personal integrity, justice, and fairness. He was, I can think of a few other Western philosophers that either were influenced by Confucius or arrived at these very same ideas independently. I'm not sure. They came much later. They probably were influenced by Confucius in that, the goal of a leader, I think, the goal of the individual is to lead by example. And if even when it's sort of dangerous or risky to ourselves to act in the service of others, complete strangers even, makes the world a safer place. We take a personal risk. It's kind of a contradiction or a paradox that we take a personal risk, or we make an effort where we get no profit from it to serve others, from the faith or belief that others, if they do the same thing, will make society a happy, safe place to live in. So Confucius was somebody who articulated that for, people to articulate for themselves. Here are some quotes by Confucius. To show forbearance, or kind of a forgiveness and patience and gentleness in teaching others. Show forbearance and gentleness in teaching others. Allow people to, learn in their own ways, kind of what he's saying here. And not to revenge unreasonable conduct, so not to punish every mistake. Therefore, the superior man cultivates a friendly harmony without being weak. What you do not want done to what you do not want done to yourself, do not do to others. Wheresoever you go, go with all your heart. I like that one. Like, do whatever it is that you have to do or want to do fully. Don't do things because somebody else tells you to do something. I mean, if you do something because somebody tells you to do something, you should still do it with all of your heart. That's kind of what he's saying here. Believe in yourself is another way of saying that. Believe in what you can do. The man of wisdom is never of two minds. Again, like, if you're going to do something, you need to do it fully. Don't be indecisive, is what he's saying here. The man of benevolence never worries. So a person who is generous is never worried of losing their wealth. A generous person gives generously without the worry of losing their wealth, giving something away and not getting anything in return. When we give, we get so much more, is what he's saying here. And the man of courage is never afraid. It does not matter how slowly you go as long as you do not stop. Difficult things, take time. Things that are worth doing are difficult. The things, the successes that we should be proud of are difficult and they take a long time. And we need to sort of be patient. So long as you, what does that say again? It does not matter how slowly you go. If you're learning a foreign language, for example, no matter how slowly you go, doesn't matter as long as you do not stop. And when you see a good person, think of becoming like her or him. When you see someone who's not so good, reflect on your weak points. So if you see something that you don't like in others, think about how you might be seen as not good to others as well. And when you see good in others, think of becoming like them, basically. Leading by example. Real knowledge is to know the extent of one's ignorance. By three methods we may learn wisdom. Reflection. Reflection is just kind of introspection or thinking without distraction, thinking about our actions, thinking about our thoughts. Like when we look in a mirror, you see your reflection, you see yourself. We may learn by reflection, thinking about, thinking about our actions, our behaviors, our relationships with other people. By imitation. So when we see people who demonstrate wisdom, when we see people who demonstrate wisdom and success, we should imitate them. And third, by experience, we have to sometimes make our own mistakes and take personal risk and actually do things. So it's not just reflection. It's also taking risk. Attack the evil that is within yourself rather than attacking the evil that is in others. That's a really good one. Don't put the blame on the world. Consider how you may inadvertently be contributing to the problem and how you can become part of the solution, or at least not continue to perpetuate the problem. Cynicism is complaining and blaming, blaming the world for the problem, blaming other people for the problems in the world. And what he's saying here is, yes, very serious problems exist in the world, in other people, but it doesn't get better, by being cynical. You should, with the force of a warrior, I guess, attack, fight the battle within yourself. All right. Continuing. Now we're going to move into Taoism. Some of you were a little late in getting here, and we were a little late getting started. So we're going to go through the three Eastern philosophers, Confucius, Lao Tzu, and the Buddha. So here's Lao Tzu, or Lao Tzu. There's different pronunciations or different spellings. I'm going to go with Lao Tzu. Lao Tzu was a Chinese philosopher also who lived in the 6th century. So they were, all of these thinkers were roughly living in the same time period. Confucius and Lao Tzu were both Chinese. There are disputes over the historical life of Lao Tzu. Historians believe he was born as Li and worked as a scholar in a library, which permitted him access and time to study many philosophical and religious texts. Here's his book here, the Dao Da Jing. Lao Tzu is credited as being the author of the Dao Da Jing, which is a book that is adopted by Taoist religious followers as their main spiritual text. So Taoism is certainly a religion, whereas Confucianism is not a religion. Lao Tzu was given, the name Lao Tzu was given to him as an honorary title, which means the great master or teacher. So the name Lao Tzu refers to a name given to whoever this individual was for being a great teacher. And so now we're just kind of looking at Taoist temples, Taoist architecture. And what's interesting about this, we did a lesson on Western architecture, European architecture, Greek, Roman, and Renaissance architecture, classical architecture. And this is Eastern architecture. And it's really, I don't know, I can only describe it as well integrated with nature. So they build these gardens, or they build these temples and cultivate gardens and make the experience, harmonious with nature. It's all about experiencing the natural world and kind of perfecting it, cultivating it. So Lao Tzu, the Dao Da Jing, teaches how to live in harmony with the Tao, which is a power that gives order in the living universe that we cannot see or express well in words. So the ideas of Lao Tzu and Taoism is that when we try to express, what the real reality is in words, we fall short. We don't have the capacity to perceive or put into language and communicate so that other people understand what we feel, what we experience. That's what he's saying essentially here. And therefore, we shouldn't try to define and articulate and control it with language. Like when we define something, put it into a concept, then we can build systems of knowledge around it. And Lao Tzu was very skeptical about that. Confucius and Lao Tzu have their differences already. Like Confucius is very focused on the individual in society, and how society should be structured, hierarchical, or at least in a way where each member of the society, each member of the family is contributing to strengthening society. Taoists, on the other hand, aren't particularly concerned with society as they are the individual in nature, and that every individual is, just a part of nature. Taoists should not try to control nature, understand it, define it, articulate it in our own language systems. Rather, we should allow ourselves to just experience it and allow nature to take its course. That will become clear when we look at his quotes, the differences between Confucius and Taoist ideas or beliefs, ideology, I suppose. So Taoism, like Buddhism, which we'll look at later, and Confucianism teach that selfish pursuit of power, control, and material wealth lead to suffering. So it's understood that materialism and selfishness, the pursuit of money and power at the expense of others, creates war, basically. War and suffering. The goal of the Taoist is to free himself. So religion and philosophy have always tried to act as a moderating influence, let's say, in that the world that we live in is governed by scarcity, and we have to work and we have to compete to survive. That is kind of part of the natural world. That's what we evolved from. But as we became civilized and socialized, as we learned to live with each other and rely on each other, we needed to moderate that impulse, that instinct to fight and dominate and control and exploit the natural world, because we rely on the natural world just as much as we rely on others. So this is why this is why Eastern philosophy is still relevant in the modern day. The goal of the Taoist is to free himself from desire after worldly material affairs and to live in a state of harmony with the natural world. So many of the problems that we have now with the environment, with the with the pandemic, let's say, and with the threat of war through weapons of mass destruction, the total surveillance security state. We live under threat of inventions of our own making. And again, as philosophers and to some degree religious institutions, at least in the very beginning, wanted to act as a moderating force, a moderating influence to get people to kind of turn away from that negative path towards the path that they're supposed to be on. Because we are beings in a living universe, but limited by our own perceptions and state of desiring, ego, and because life is full of suffering and death is inevitable, Taoists also believe that meditation and correct living can guide our lives in a state of harmony with the living universe, or Tao. So this is what the Dao Da Jing is all about. It kind of it tries to express what it feels like to reach that state of connection, not necessarily enlightenment, but that state of connection to the natural world. When you visit a garden, you feel a kind of a connection to the natural world that you don't get when you're in your apartment or at the shopping mall. According to Taoism, no text can teach a person everything they need to know. This is a big difference between the Western and Eastern religions. Like the Western religions say that all of the truth is contained in the Bible. Eastern thinkers, Eastern religions, philosophies say that the text is unable to really express completely what is true. You have to experience it for yourself, and you have to follow the practices such as meditation and ethical conduct to be able to enjoy that experience. According to Taoism, no text can teach a person everything they need to know. Instead, they need to be attentive to their own inner feelings and other forms of hints shown to the seeker. The Dao Da Jing is a book that attempts to describe what it feels like to be in tune with the Tao. And Tao means way of knowing. Here are the quotes. The journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And what is that journey? Where does that journey lead to? Knowing others is intelligence. Knowing yourself is wisdom. Mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is power. I like the kind of contradictions that this author speaks in, right? Like he's saying that it's important to study other people, but you need to also understand your own motivations, your own personality, or how you are seen by others, and how you feel when you are with others, I suppose is what he's saying. Wisdom is when you understand your own imperfections or your own inadequacies, and how to try to correct those, but also to recognize that everyone is imperfect and to be sort of cautious about who you are interacting with, or if you're dealing with somebody who's ignorant, like a child or something like that, show forbearance to how other people think. Mastering others is strength. Mastering yourself is power. So Life is a series of natural and spontaneous changes. Don't resist them. Be like water. Go with the flow. Resisting change only creates sorrow or suffering. Let reality be reality. Let things flow naturally, forward in whatever way they like. So don't try to control the events. A good traveler has no fixed plans and no intent on arriving. When I let go of what I am, I become what I might be. Time is a created thing. So again, like we allocate our activities and our interests into units of time or sections of time. And when we say we don't have time, it's like saying, I don't want to do this thing. When we say I don't have time, it's like saying I don't want to. And I think what he's trying to say here is that, saying, making excuses, using time as an excuse for not improving your life or not making a difficult decision, is just that. Like the only thing we control is our actions or our intention to act. And when we have that right intent, it doesn't matter how much time it takes, we will work at something until it reaches completion. The best fighter is never angry. If you are depressed, you are living in the past. If you are anxious, you are living in the future. If you are at peace, you are living in the present. Care about what other people think and you will always be their prisoner. Be content with what you have. Rejoice in the way things are. When you realize there is nothing lacking, the whole world belongs to you. So the attitude of gratitude and just being content with things as they are, not trying to get more or not being dissatisfied with what you lack. Be grateful for what you have. At the center of your being, and this is the way to happiness, at the center of your being, you have the answer. You know who you are and what you want. Sometimes we go after things that we think we want, and then we kind of get it, and we realize this wasn't what we wanted. We kind of feel empty. Here we are with the last thinker in this lesson, and this is Buddha, or Siddhartha Gautama. So, who was this individual? The Buddha, which translates to the enlightened one, born Siddhartha, was a prince who gave up the comforts of his life in his father's palace to seek enlightenment. Through his meditations, he realized the essential unreality of the world and experienced the bliss of nirvana. After his enlightenment, he spent the remainder of his life teaching others how to escape the endless cycle of birth and death. Taoism is a religion and Buddhism is a religion as well. Confucianism is kind of a moral doctrine, and so practitioners of Buddhism or Taoism adopt a kind of a worldview that we live in an intelligent, living universe, basically. And so there are other forces in the natural world outside of human society that have their own sentience, consciousness, intelligence, and Taoists and Buddhists feel that when we kind of interfere in the lives of other sentient creatures, when we perpetuate suffering, that suffering will, through cause and effect or the consequences of our actions come back to us, and So any suffering that we intentionally or inadvertently cause in others, other sentient living things, only further traps us in a life of suffering. Now, Siddhartha was thought to be born in Nepal around 400 BC, so a little later, I guess. The exact historical dates are uncertain. So again, like this individual, Siddhartha Gautama, grew up in a culture, India, Nepal, India, that was influenced by Eastern thought, Confucianism and Taoism, I suppose, and also Hinduism. And Buddhism became very popular in China, whereas Hinduism didn't. So Hinduism is an older kind of a religion that has this worldview built into it, but many other forms of deities, types of gods. It's a much more complicated system. I guess Buddhism became much more popular internationally, especially in countries like China, Japan, Korea, Vietnam, Thailand, and so on. Because it didn't come with this sort of complicated hierarchy of deities. We can look at a Greek pantheistic religion in a future lesson as well when we get to people like Aristotle. So anyway, Buddhism simplified that, and that's why it really became popular. Again, because it came with the promise of ending suffering. A way of finding that enlightenment. Confucianism and Taoism. Taoism sort of offers some enlightenment, but it's not quite as well defined as what this individual taught. So Buddhism, the difference between Buddhism and Taoism is that there is some emphasis put on the individual here. That it is sort of an individualistic spiritual practice, like Buddhists practice. I'm not a Buddhist, but Buddhists practice Buddhism out of a selfish or out of self-preservation, I suppose, out of the desire to end their own personal suffering. And Taoists do the same, but that's the difference between Buddhism and Taoism, or that's one of the differences. Stories about the Buddha are told as myth. In other words, the events of his life were told in short stories passed verbally for many years before committed to writing. So many different variations of the story of the life of Buddha and his attainment of enlightenment exist in different texts, in different cultures. Since then, the stories have been told in countless variations in different cultures where Buddhism is practiced. So you see different like artistic depictions and different variations on the stories. And here we get to see a little bit of what Nepal looks like, and where what we call like Tibetan Buddhism is practiced. And you can find this story. It's an English story that tells the story of this individual. I read this when I was very young, actually. Siddhartha Gautama. So in the book, like Buddhist texts are often incomplete and veiled in very vague, ambiguous language. It's very mysterious. This author here tried to present a story that Western international audiences, readers could digest. So the story goes. Young Siddhartha grew up as a prince in a gated palace. His family forbade him to leave the palace, and this made him very bored and curious about the world, and he decided he would try to escape. When he left the palace, he was shocked by the sight of the people who lived in poverty and suffering from illness. So he was deeply upset by the idea that life was only temporary and that death was inevitable. And this is kind of what all Buddhists firmly keep in mind. They always remind themselves about the impermanence of life, that living things are born, they grow into maturity, and then they wither away. And so there's like a contradiction about life, and it brings a whole range of emotions. But ultimately it's death. So we should always kind of keep that in, well, not we, but like Buddhists should always keep that in mind, or Buddhists keep that in mind. And this kind of informs their decision making and their day-to-day thoughts and actions. So he decided he would renounce his life and seek after enlightenment. He never returned to his father's palace, giving up all his wealth and comfort and abandoning his own wife and children. For many years, he wandered and meditated alone, and sometimes studying with other spiritual masters. So the theme of this individual's life was that growing up, having all of the material comforts and possessions and, the wife and kids and the beautiful palace, and no need to work, no need to do like hard physical labor. He was unhappy with that. Probably because he was moved by a compassion for others. When he saw others suffering, he felt their suffering. This is why he was the chosen one. Because he felt it so deeply that he sacrificed everything and spent years alone, or years kind of wandering, wandering in a kind of poverty and pain, feeling that poverty and pain, and not getting any closer to enlightenment, dealing with this kind of frustration. So meditation is the practice of sitting quietly in the attempt to control and quiet the mind. And this practice of meditation is practiced in India and it has been practiced in India and Central Asia for many hundreds of years. So in his lifetime, there were many other kinds of religions that really don't exist anymore today. But they were powerful in his day, and there were just lots of them. We call them little sects. A sect is a small group, a small spiritual group that believes in a certain ritual that can give them the enlightenment, the spiritual connection. So he associated with all of these different groups and tried different ways of meditating, and he realized that there was some benefit to doing this, and then there was no point in doing that. Siddhartha attained enlightenment or nirvana suddenly and unexpectedly while meditating under a Bodhi tree. He experienced 3 days of spiritual consciousness according to the legend, where he met and communicated with these spiritual entities. So this is the legend, the myth. And there is, a kind of a similarity here to the Christian religion, where the Christian spiritual savior, also, Jesus Christ, experienced a kind of a death and rebirth that took place over 3 days, where he met spiritual entities as well. It's just an interesting similarity in the legend. How I can't really speculate on it, but it is interesting that these myths, wherever they originated from, have and however they originated, have these recurring themes. When he returned to his normal consciousness, he decided to spend the rest of his life teaching others how to meditate. But Taoism doesn't necessarily teach how to meditate, whereas Buddhism teaches a very specific way, a very well-defined single way. People recognize this in him, in his teaching, that there was a clear, direct way of reaching that kind of enlightenment without the trial and error that he went through. So here is the way. Buddha taught about essential practices such as the middle path. Avoid having too many pleasures in life, such as food and drink. It's not good for the body or the soul to do too many good things. I mean, it has to be balanced or moderated with work or simplicity. In the same way, look after the health of the body. The Noble Eightfold Path. In all thoughts and actions, consider how to do things in the correct way. a state of thinking that the Buddhists call mindfulness. Buddhists conduct their lives following the guidelines of the Eightfold Path, avoiding causing suffering to themselves and others. Okay, so what is the Eightfold Path? What are the 8 things, if you have a checklist, I guess, what are the 8 things that you need to do every day? It's also categorized into three areas. So, mental development is the last one, or maybe it's the most important one. The Buddhist practice is a lifelong practice, and one through meditation and right action sort of develops mentally and gains the strength, gains the endurance, I think, of every day doing the right thing. So it means having the right intention or wanting the right things. Sometimes we want the wrong things. Conduct, the right speech, speaking in a way that is kind of respectful. Action, doing things out of selflessness for the most part. And livelihood. Also, you have to have if you want to be a sincere Buddhist. I'm not trying to proselytize this, but I'm just trying to explain these ideas. You have to choose a kind of a livelihood. This is what he taught, that you have to, maybe if you're working as a soldier or something like that, if you're working as a banker, you might not be able to continue to engage in that kind of livelihood, associate with these kinds of communities if your goal is enlightenment. You have to find a livelihood that allows you to kind of prioritize the right conduct, the ethical conduct. Here are the quotes, and then we will be finished. Okay, so long is the night to him who is awake. Long is a mile to him who is tired. Long is life to the foolish who do not know the true law. I wonder what that means. All that we are aware is the result of what we have thought. It is founded on our own thoughts and made up of our thoughts. If a man speak or act with an evil thought, suffering follows him as the wheel follows the hoof of the beast that draws the wagon. If a man speak or act with a good thought, happiness follows him, like a shadow that never leaves him. So, what is the law? The law is that all that we are, like where we are now, is the result of what we have thought yesterday and the day before that, and continuing into the past. So, if we want to change our livelihood, it begins with changing our thoughts today, but we have to live with the consequences of every other action that we made in the past, every decision that we made in the past. This is kind of what he is talking about with the law. And when you don't understand, like what he is saying is that when you don't understand that this is the law, that, your life is the result of your thoughts, you're going to be making kinds of mistakes and experiencing all kinds of suffering. However many holy words you read, however many you speak, what good will they do if you do not act on them? So that's the other interesting thing about Buddhism, is that this Buddha was not a scholar. He didn't write anything down. He only tried to teach others, and his philosophy was one of action. Not many things needed to be said. It just, he said, trust your own intuition and act on it. When your intuition, when your heart tells you to do something, act on it. Even if it's difficult, especially if it's difficult. No one saves us but ourselves. No one can and no one may. This is a big difference between Eastern and Western religion, anyway, in that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam are really predicated on having some divine savior come and save mankind. Here Buddha is saying that no one can save us but ourselves. we ourselves must walk the path. There is no path to happiness. Happiness is the path. There's a very clear correlation there with Taoism, that the journey leads us forward, but we're not trying to get to any one fixed point. Peace comes from within. Do not seek it without. This is the trap of materialism. When you seek happiness in your next material object here. If we could see the miracle of a single flower clearly, our whole life would change. Your purpose in life is to find your purpose and to give your whole heart and soul to it. And I guess this is the last one. True love is born of understanding. Now, just to be clear, I am not teaching a course on Buddhism or Taoism or Confucianism. I actually don't know enough about it. I've always been curious in these kinds of things, but I have no intention of, being an expert on this. What I am trying to do is present these lectures to you to give you introductions into the biographies of influential thinkers. So when we come back to this topic of great people in history, the great figures in history, we'll be looking at Western philosophers, as well as scientists, as well as artists, as well as business leaders. Okay? So look forward to that.